Can a single wrong decision before the lights go out ruin an entire race? For Ferrari, it seems like that's exactly what happened at Silverstone. Their weekend turned into another frustrating chapter, with only Hamilton managing to take home points, while it's becoming a pattern at this stage. What stood out this time was how openly disappointed both Charles and Lewis were. Their frustration echoed across team radio all race long. Some of the decisions made by the team raised serious questions. The pit wall calls weren't just risky, some felt almost reckless. And with emotions boiling over again, one can't help but wonder, will the team from Maranello finally take serious action? Or is their focus already drifting toward 2026? Once again, Ferrari proved that their core issues haven't gone anywhere. Internal problems continue to surface, especially around strategy. Right from the start, it was clear things weren't going according to plan. Charles Leclerc went with a bold tire choice, believing the track was dry enough to run slicks, but that gamble fell flat. Just one lap in, he radioed to confirm. The track was still too wet. He wasn't alone in that call either. Lando Norris was informed that George Russell, who started fourth, also took the same risk, and was nowhere near the frontrunners in terms of pace. Shortly after that, the safety car made an appearance. That gave Leclerc the chance to ditch the slicks and switch to intermediates. But by that time, the damage was already done. The initial risk didn't work, and he had lost crucial track position. Climbing back up was nearly impossible, especially as the rain picked up again. While speaking to his race engineer about how the car felt, Charles didn't hold back. He said the rear end was overheating compared to the front, and the car balance was shifting unpredictably. The brake settings also seemed off, and he admitted he couldn't even tell how the brakes were behaving anymore. That kind of confusion, mid-race, only added to the chaos. As the race entered its final stages, Charles knew he had one last shot to make up ground. The shift from intermediates back to slicks. Fernando Alonso made the first move, prompting Ferrari to check with Charles about tire preference. The team offered two choices, a used medium or a used hard compound. Charles leaned toward the yellow-marked tires, clearly suggesting the mediums, but somehow, the crew ended up fitting softs instead, a confusing decision that didn't match what he asked for. That call didn't just backfire. It became the moment where everything fell apart. The softer tires couldn't handle the conditions, and Charles started struggling immediately. At turn 15, he nearly lost control, nearly colliding with Carlos Sainz, his former teammate. The incident damaged Sainz's front wing and added even more drama to a race that had already gone off the rails. Charles eventually crossed the line in P14. No points, just frustration. The tension spilled over after the checkered flag. Charles's voice on the radio said it all. "Yeah, that was effing bad. Sorry, I'm at a loss of words." He admitted he didn't even know where he had placed the car during the race. That's how unsettled he felt inside the cockpit, and it wasn't just the race that left him boiling. Even after qualifying, where he managed P6, he sounded furious. It was clear he expected a front-row start based on the car's pace, but that expectation didn't materialize. Despite his mistakes, Charles didn't shy away from responsibility. He acknowledged that comparing his performance with Lewis Hamilton's might help him figure out where things went wrong. Meanwhile, Lewis was still managing to stay in the fight at the front, even though he had his own struggles, particularly with overtaking Pierre Gasly in the Alpine and eventually finishing behind Nico Hülkenberg. For Charles, the most painful realization was that his setup was only effective in dry conditions. He explained that the first two sectors looked dry, and he expected the rest of the track to follow quickly. That turned out to be a misjudgment. But even more worrying was what came next. He said straight up that the biggest issue wasn't just the wrong tire choice, it was the lack of pace. Charles's disappointment wasn't limited to strategy errors or changing weather. The real sting came from realizing that even if everything had gone right, the car still didn't have the speed. That's what bothered him the most. He wasn't just frustrated, he was demanding explanations. He made it clear he wanted answers before even heading home. This wasn't a simple case of bad luck. It was a recurring problem that, in his view, had been ignored for far too long. And unfortunately, it wasn't just Charles dealing with chaos. On the other side of the garage, things weren't going much better for Lewis Hamilton. The champion was visibly uncomfortable throughout the race, especially after the team made a questionable call to bring him in for a pit stop. That decision dropped him from P4 down to P8, a massive blow considering the tight midfield competition. According to internal reports, the GPS signal from Hamilton's car was lost during the pit window, which complicated matters. But still, the damage was done. Hamilton didn't sugarcoat his feelings. Over the radio, he described the car as nearly impossible to handle, snappy like crazy. In his own words, that initial call cost him valuable positions, and more importantly, it ended his incredible streak of podium finishes at Silverstone, which had lasted since 2014. For a driver of his caliber, missing out like that, and not because of personal mistakes but because of strategy errors, was unacceptable. When asked later about the sequence of decisions, Hamilton admitted that not every choice made by the team worked. In fact, he was pretty blunt. That first call, that wasn't it. Got undercut by several drivers. He made it clear that they'd need to go back and analyze what really happened, but one thing was obvious. Dropping from 4th to 8th within a single pit window wasn't something they could afford, especially at this stage in the season. Even when he made his own call to pit later on, the car still refused to cooperate. Conditions were tricky, and he ended up losing control multiple times, going wide at turn 3, turn 9, turn 11. The list goes on. Before switching to slicks, Hamilton had been trailing Nico Hülkenberg by just a couple of seconds. But once both drivers changed tires, with Hamilton stopping first and Hülkenberg coming in a lap later, the gap between them stretched to 10 seconds. That alone highlighted how much time Lewis lost due to poor timing and a questionable call from the pit wall. For someone who has built a reputation on consistency and calculated driving, such mismanagement felt like a setback that could have easily been avoided. This wasn't just about a single race. The problems seemed to be piling up, and the way things were unfolding behind the scenes at Ferrari raised serious questions. Can the team be trusted to support two world-class drivers with the decisions they need to compete at the top? Based on how things played out at Silverstone, that answer didn't seem too encouraging. And as we look at the bigger picture, it's hard to ignore the growing frustration on both sides of the garage. Charles felt like the SF25 wasn't responding. 2 changes. He couldn't find confidence in the balance, and worst of all, he wasn't sure the current problems could be fixed. Earlier in the weekend, he had said they were aware of what was wrong with the car, and they'd work on it. But by the end of Sunday, his mood had shifted completely. He looked and sounded defeated, saying they were stuck with these problems for longer than expected. Still, when reporters brought this up later, team boss Frederick Vasseur was quick to push back. He didn't reveal what the exact issue was, but made it clear that while the team was indeed struggling, the problem could be resolved. Charles, for his part, followed the team's line and kept the details private. I can't say what it is, he admitted, but yes, it's something we're battling with, and it needs fixing. So what's next? That's the big question now, hanging over Ferrari. The communication gap between drivers and engineers is wider than it should be, and decisions that need to be sharp are coming too late or not at all. Things are starting to feel urgent now. Ferrari is clearly facing a challenge that goes beyond just speed. It's also about trust. The drivers aren't convinced that the people making the calls understand the full situation. When Lewis and Charles voice their concerns, it doesn't seem like the response is fast or effective enough. And in Formula One, hesitation or confusion costs positions and sometimes entire races. After everything that went wrong at Silverstone, Hamilton didn't hold back in his feedback. He admitted he struggled to keep up with the cars ahead. The grip faded quickly, and his car became unpredictable. He even said it was unbelievably tricky to drive in those changing conditions. But despite all that frustration, Lewis still took something from the experience. He said he learned a lot that day, especially since this was only his second time handling that specific car setup in the wet. Still, it was clear, the current package doesn't handle low-grip situations well, and something has to change. Lewis made an important point afterward. He plans to sit down with the technical staff responsible for designing the next car. He wants to make sure that whatever issues they're seeing now don't carry over into next season's machine. That's a serious statement from a driver who's always been involved with car development, and when a multiple-time champion starts pushing for that kind of influence, it shows just how worried he is. From the outside, it's becoming obvious that both drivers feel the car isn't listening to them, and that their feedback isn't being turned into solutions. Even if you ignore the strategy problems or pit wall decisions, this lack of responsiveness is dangerous for any team trying to compete at the front of the grid. If Charles and Lewis keep speaking up without seeing results, the pressure will only grow. The question now is how. Ferrari responds because their drivers have run out of patience. After everything that unfolded at Silverstone, one thing is clear. Both Charles and Lewis are starting to lose faith in how things are being managed on race weekends. For a team with the legacy of Ferrari, that's not just a small issue. It's a signal that change needs to happen, and soon. The current problems aren't just technical, they go deeper. There's a growing disconnect between what the drivers need and what the team is providing. Whether it's communication delays, poor decisions under pressure, or failure to act on clear feedback, it all adds up to frustration that can be heard over the radio and seen on the track. When a driver like Charles says, "I don't even know where I placed the car," you know something is seriously wrong. That's not a problem of motivation, it's a problem of structure. For Hamilton, the situation isn't any better. The errors in timing, the questionable pit calls, and the lack of grip in changing conditions all suggest a car that's not being prepared the right way, or a team that's misreading the race as it happens. And while Lewis remains calm and professional in most cases, even he couldn't hide his disappointment this time. When a champion speaks this openly, it means the situation has crossed a line. As we move deeper into the season, the spotlight will stay on Ferrari, not just for their results, but for how they handle their internal challenges. If the team continues to fall short, Both drivers might begin to seriously reconsider their roles in this project, especially with the big changes coming in 2026. No one wants to fight at the back when they know they could be leading from the front. The drivers are speaking up. The performance isn't matching expectations, and the patience is running out. So, the final question is, will Ferrari act before it's too late?